Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. If you're new to the show, please hit the like, please hit the subscribe. Don't forget to hit that bell so you are notified whenever we go live, as we are constantly adding new shows to the channel, and we're always doing crazy stuff here at This is Revolution. Today, I did a 2-hour live stream with our friends in Germany, 99 zu 1, 99% to the 1%. And they had hit me up a few months ago, and it was one of those things where I totally forgot about it until, maybe a couple weeks before I put it on my calendar, where I usually do, there's another room I have here where I do all the video editing, and I haven't been doing too much video editing. I've been doing a lot of writing with this new sublation launch. We did that group stream, and I just haven't been in my room where the calendar is, and I just happened to look down, and because I had added my restream to their restream, which is this program we use to do the show, I got an alert. I was like, damn it. So I hurried up, got dressed, and did a 2-hour stream about metal and politics. So check that out. That's actually on our YouTube channel as well, but definitely please subscribe to the 99 zu 1 YouTube channel. We've done, I think, 2 streams with those fellas. I know we at least did one on our channel last year. And when Pascal comes back, we'll do another Saturday morning group stream with those dudes. It's always a good time. The first one we did, they got deep into the weeds on reparations and what goes on in Germany, and that was really, really interesting. So definitely check that one out. Also, we had a great show Tuesday. If you haven't checked that, I got to have, a lot of the work I do is on kind of culture war stuff. So I had Andrew Hartman, wrote the definitive book on the culture war, and Djene Sanko, who wrote a really interesting documentary called The Brainwashing of My Father that definitely gets into the weeds of a lot of the stuff that we talk about here as far as deregulation, the rise of the right. So that was fun. If I said if, then I'm wrong, Anton. I meant when. I said if. It's definitely when Pascal comes back, not if. And so, but in his absence, we've been having special guest hosts. So you guys know it's hard to book the guest and then get a guest host. But today, I have a special guest host. If you are longer time listeners, when the show was just strictly a audio only show, I forget how me and this person connected initially, but we were talking about working in services, especially for the unhoused, and we had this back and forth. I was like, you should come on the show. She was like, I don't want to come on, and I don't want to say my name because I'm trying to get a job in the industry, and I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. And it was a very good show. And maybe a year after that, Pascal and I were doing a show called It's Not All in Your Head with Dr. Harriet Fraud. And her co-host at the time said, hey, there was a person you did a show with that was a drug counselor. Can you give me that person's information? We'd love to get them on the show. And now my special guest co-host is a co-host with Dr. Harriet Fraud on It's Not All in Your Head. So please welcome my special co-host today, Ikoi Hiro, a harm reduction advocate and substance abuse disorder counselor based out of San Diego, California, and co-host of It's Not All in Your Head. Please welcome Ikoi Hiro. thank you so much for joining me.
Well,
And
thank you for having me.
no. This is big for me because I was like, can you please help me out for co-host? I think it'd be good. It'd be a nice change of pace. And you were like, okay. I was like, but you got to show your face. And you did.
I know.
Shout out for that. And also coming all the way live, he was stuck in Death Star traffic. Damn those pesky rebels. You know him as everyone's favorite manager, middle manager, king of Imperial PMC nonsense. He is the one and only Deep State Kuba.
The Death Star traffic, it wasn't a rebel problem. A Banta jackknifed on the Santa Ana. Just like thermal detonators everywhere, all over the place. Yeah, it's just sad. It's just sad.
My plan for yesterday was that I was going to try, as I was writing this thing, I was going to play all the Star Wars movies in the background. Like that was my entire plan for the day, and I failed. I didn't even turn the TV on. I was so like caught up in reading and writing and then fussing about what we were fussing about before.
The show doesn't happen without a lot of fussing.
Sometimes I wish
toddler's nap time.
I wish they could be privy to some of the fussing, because I, out of everyone right now, has been very, very upset, and I'm definitely not going to get into it why, but yeah, as you know, Kuba, I was just so mad. I just like, you know what? I was like fussing to myself in the house. That's how pissed I was.
I mean, the talking to yourself after the fact is like a dangerous level of pissed. That's the stage immediately before, well, I have to do something, right? So you want to de-escalate.
Because you know what sucks is, I think I said this when we were going back and forth. When I saw the thing that pissed me off, I'm looking at my phone. I'm like, the only person that might be awake right now is Kuba, and I just don't want to bother him because he has the strangest sleep schedule out of all of us. Because sometimes Kuba will call you at midnight.
Yeah, this is true.
At 9.
Hey, sometimes you pull the short straw, like in the Langley surveillance desk. Ironically enough, the graveyard shift is not when you get the most intercepted dick pics. You'd think it would be, but no. It's actually the mid-morning crew. That's the real gold mine.
So I have to stay up. So if this makes you feel any better, or not better, but if it makes you giggle more, only Kuba and I are on the same, or Doug Lane, but Kuba and I are on the same time zone. And Djene, of course, is in another planet. Might as well be, because he's like 8 hours ahead. And Marcus called me at 5 this morning, pissed over the same thing. And he says, the first thing he says is, "Did I wake you?" I'm like, bitch, you know you woke me. It's 5:30 in the morning. So yeah, he fussed at me for about a good hour. Same thing. So we're gonna get all the fussing out next Tuesday. Adolph Reed will be the guest next Tuesday. So, Kuba, I think we'll let our guest lead off the news show.
I'm going to start first.
Oh, ladies first. We are gentlemen here at This Is Revolution.
Yeah, ladies first, even if it's a firing squad.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Not
Or would
really,
you like
but
Kuba to go first?
no, I can go first. It's, I will be speaking today about the Roe versus Wade, but I'm going to be speaking more about some of, the real life consequences that a lot of people don't necessarily consider when thinking about abortion laws and reproductive justice. Especially kind of like in the light of all the things that have happened with over the years, right? How the right has been basically like, Roe has been more or less in hospice for a long time for the vast majority of the country, like 89%, I believe, of counties in the United States haven't had a provider, which is kind of, that is not an exactly accessible medical procedure. And when you combine that with like the opioid crisis and criminalization of drugs and many other factors, it kind of it does bring to a very, very bleak landscape in many ways. And especially one of the things that happened with COVID is it gave a really good sense of, I mean, how much trust people don't have with social services and also with like the medical institutions, and how all these kind of like combine to create this like ever snowball problem. So like one of the major things as well is also like there is a significant amount of shame and stigma associated with abortion, and even like birth control, sexually transmitted infections, just basically talking about like reproductive health in general. There is a general lack of education. For example, like, I mean, only not sex ed isn't necessarily required as part of the education curriculum, and to this day, like 37 states require that sex education must include abstinence, and 26 of which require that it be stressed. So only 13 states require that information taught in sex education be medically accurate.
And not only that, but sex education is becoming, even as the sort of abstinence only wave may have crested with George W. Bush. And I remember there was a very strong push then. Now, as we're seeing in Florida with DeSantis and the confrontation with the Don't Say Gay bill, LGBTQ education is that's becoming a new battleground where a lot of conservative intensity, a lot of mobilization is taking place around the whole idea that children are being indoctrinated. Again, undermining the confidence in teachers, in medical practitioners, in these institutions, which are supposed to be at the very front of providing essential services to Americans.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I mean, this is slightly older data, so it's 2017, but 1/3 of federal funding for sex ed is still abstinence only, and the same people pushing for that, like you said, are the ones that are basically pushing for all the erasure of any LGBT education and awareness in schools. So absolutely.
And it's conservatives often complain that public education or public health or community organizations are a means of converting what are supposed to be apolitical service provision programs or efforts into cash infusions to progressive groups, right? And that basically the wokeistan, if you pardon the expression, is parasitic on the welfare state, because groups like Acorn or diversity, education, and inclusion trainers, or abortion providers,
Right.
they end up receiving public funds through one mechanism or another as groups contracted to provide public services. But the same thing is true of conservative groups on things like the abstinence only side.
Yeah.
Right. If that's what you're mandating to be taught, then you're not going to get ideologically representative groups competing for that contract. It's always going to end up in the hands of a conservative religious organization, and it's a way of funding them through public monies.
Yes, yeah. There's absolutely a economic, factor to how conservatives kind of get access to taxpayer money, right? Through these ways as well, And one of the other statistics that I want to get into is also, especially with the opioid epidemic, the criminalization of drugs, and criminalization of women who do drugs is a significant issue. And it's also an issue that, really does increase the risk of alienating people from social services and from medical care, because, like currently 24 states plus DC, using drugs while pregnant is considered child abuse. 23 states plus DC has reporting requirements for medical providers. So, health professionals to report suspected prenatal drug use. And 8 of them require reporting in prenatal drug exposure if they suspect drug use. And then there's also the fetal personhood, fetal assault, chemical endangerment laws that are in various states. And that and if you think about one of the things that was really surprising, I knew that women's incarceration was increasing. I did not know that between 1980 and 2019 that it increased by 700%.
Whoa. Because of these laws?
So I'll go into more of that. So in 1980, the number of incarcerated women were 26,378, right? In 2019, it rose to 222,455.
And that's going to be war on drugs. That's going to be Reagan. It's going to be a lot of damage.
Right. And more than 60% of women in state prisons have a child under the age of 18. Let's see. And it's the growth for female imprisonment is twice that of men.
Yeah, I mean, nobody had it good, but you're pointing to the real kicker, the fact that it was so disproportionately targeting women. And this is one thing that reaction I had reading about Roe versus Wade and the possibility that this Alito opinion will become ruling law. Once states begin to enact punitive restrictions on abortion, you'll have to enforce them.
Right.
Which I think a lot of conservatives that really are moved by the sort of American Holocaust hyper-moralized stance on abortion, and especially the imperative for criminalization, have this very naive view that if you make something illegal, people stop doing it.
Right.
So once they get their laws changed, it's like, okay, our job is done. Baby Jesus doesn't have to cry anymore. But anyone who understands how law enforcement works and the grinding inequality in the United States will recognize that this means pregnant women in hospitals being arrested, that you're going to need to have pregnant women in jail. You're going to need to have pregnant women surveillance, but you can't trust those, you can't trust devilish Jezebels to be honest about whether or not they're pregnant. So you're also going to need to have non-pregnant woman surveillance, so you can know when they're actually pregnant, so you can know when to arrest them if they do something wrong. And
Right.
this,
This has a potential to criminalize miscarriage.
exactly, and you're going to need institutions like private prisons, which, another way to infuse cash to conservative backers, conservative sponsors, conservative groups.
Let me ask this question, because I like where you're going, Coop, and I like what
You do? What's wrong with you, man? This is some Handmaid's Tale bullshit.
Yeah.
I like where you're going with this. So in the great city of San Francisco, when I was living there back in 2000 and something, I remember there was kind of a bit of there was still pimping and prostitution, but there was this shift that a lot of dudes were putting women out there with a child to get sympathy money. Do you remember that, Kuba?
Well, you're describing a very well-known tactic when street level panhandling gets organized. In Europe, it would be
gypsies.
That's a
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of marginalized groups. Once they organize, it's funny because in Romania, where you had too many kids, not enough older people, you didn't use the children for sympathy. The kids formed their own gangs. It was a little like a union or a syndicate. But when you have
kind of also the case like in places like Colombia, if I recall.
If you have enough, it's basically orphans or too high a birth rate, especially if that is sits side by side with violence and poverty. The kid who just happens to get their growth spurt first or the most violent DNA will self-organize a gang between the age of 12 and 14. And then you're off to the races. And then, it's only good things happen after that. But incidentally, which is where you get when you criminalize abortion, because you're going to have more children to mothers who don't have the resources to look after them, which is another way to criminalize womanhood.
If you remember, there would be a few different women, but I'm sure people thought it was the same woman, and they definitely had different children. And I saw them so much because of where I worked that I was like, oh, that's actually a different kid. So this is I got hip to the scam real quick, and they'd sit outside with a sign, please can you help? And there's adorable little kid. And
today, in the role of struggling orphan, we have the understudy playing the part.
But people would give the money, people with sympathy money, and sometimes on the BART train, because they'd go on BART too, which is our subway system in the Bay Area, BART. People would yell at them, and the yelling would be the same thing all the time. Where is Child Protective Services? Why won't anyone take these children away?
Right. I mean, yeah, that would be the call everywhere.
As we talk about, women that use while they're pregnant, I don't know if people understand, when you are receiving some sort of benefit, you're constantly surveilled by the service, constantly, and
often surveillance and administration costs programs a significant percentage of their total budgets. Right, you'd be better off just letting people get away with lower levels of fraud if you just dismantled the very expensive processes and agencies, bureaucracies of compliance that you've put into place.
And as you know, if you get housing and you have a child, or you're pregnant with housing, they're going to test you for drugs the moment you have your baby.
Right.
And depending on where you are, maybe.
I mean, they test the baby if they could.
I don't know if they do. I know they test the. There's some way they can test the baby, because I actually know people that have had children and been under the influence, and the kid comes out and tests positive, and then there's some programs that'll keep you for so long, you and your child, and try to get you clean. But what I wanted to know, Ikoi, is your opinion on, like, what do you think is the best way to try to approach this? Because as you are a harm reduction advocate, and we've had a very long off-air conversations about harm reduction. If you had the funding, and these are always hard questions to ask because we never can really imagine having the funding.
Right.
But if you actually had the funding, what would be a better strategy? Because it is a reality that there are people that are using, pregnant. There is a sad reality to some of the things that I've definitely seen out of my eyes that happens with people with children, that they do. What is a better way than what we're doing now?
I mean, one of the major things is that you don't want to make for a punitive social and medical system that alienates them further from care, ultimately, for the benefit of the mother and the child. So one of the major things I would do is remove a lot of the reporting laws. I would remove a lot of the criminalization of women, and really, because one of the major issues here too is a lot of women that are caught up in this. So 26% of incarcerated women are there for drug charges, which is double that of men. Men is only 13%. I was also really surprised by that, because I thought it would be.
I bet what happens actually is any man that is arrested on drug charges, the arresting officers or maybe the prosecutor upcharges them, while the threshold is stops possession for females that are targeted. I mean, that's just hearing you make that. Hearing those statistics, that's just an idea that pops into mind, because it's almost always the same. A great deal of crime in the United States is just the sort of pathologies of often urban poverty and drug addiction, drugs, vagrancy, street crime, and then depending on how punitive the particular police department or jurisdiction is, you can convert that into basically the criminal code becomes a menu, and you just pick what you want to charge people with.
Right. So that may not actually reflect the actual issue. But one of the ways for a lot of women that are caught up in these systems to avoid prison is going through rehab. But one of the major issues is, if you already have pre-existing children, it's really difficult to go through a residential program for obvious reasons. You need to find caretakers for your children. And also,
And exactly, you while you're getting clean to settle one legal issue, your absence creates another legal issue that can be used to justify taking your children away.
Right. And also, there's just a huge lack of services for women with substance use, disorder. Only 25% percent of facilities take in women, and we're not saying like these facilities are, the entire population is necessarily pregnant women. It's, usually like a facility will take in like a handful, maybe. There are facilities that are dedicated, but those are even smaller in percentage. So so that basically means that a lot of women are not able to avoid prison because there is just not the proper amount of services available to address the need.
And from a brute, being the deep state Death Star middle manager that I am, I look at a lot of problems through a cost benefit analysis, and the cost of even inpatient addiction treatment is significantly less than that of incarceration. So from a purely fiscally responsible good governance position, there's a strong case to be made. Stop building private prisons, start funding more sort of user tailored drug rehab facilities and treatment centers, especially since one of the greatest factors for recidivism is a previous felony conviction. So if you can keep people out of the system early and divert them towards treatment, then you're not just dealing with a single issue, but potentially shifting an entire generation's worth of costs and human suffering, most of all, preventing that.
How do we get people to think that way, though? Because first of all, I think a big problem that we have is, as I'm doing research for this paper that I'm writing, the idea of criminality, I think, allows us to look at people as less than. So I think a major thing that you're talking about right now, Ikoy, is the fact that when you have poor women, especially if you're like poor, borderline unhoused, if you're pregnant, in the eyes of law enforcement, first of all, which sometimes are the moral police in their own mind, and kind of in the eyes of society, we view you as a bit of a blight. You are
there is an extraordinarily amount of stigma when it comes to women and substance use in general, but you add in pregnancy on top of that, and the stigma is extreme. I mean, it's one of those things where I remember there was a woman when I was working at the facility. She wasn't one of our residents clients, but I just ended up, she came to one of our open meetings that we would have, because we would host AA meetings for ANA meetings for the community, and she had come in and to one of the open meetings, and I just ended up talking to her, and she was just giving me her life story. And one of the things that she said was that until the day that she became pregnant and couldn't stop using, she was just like, until I became one of them, like I had nothing but like the harshest judgment for that sector of even as a drug user. She was like, I had so much judgment until it happened to me.
That's one of the mechanisms for sort of ego preservation, self-respect preservation, in a society where there's a great deal of inequality and visible suffering, that you have to be able to draw a line of merit between you and the suffering class, so that they deserve it and you don't.
Right.
And that also makes them, in a way, right, like untouchable in the religious sense. That once you've cashed your first government check, once you've eaten of the fruit of welfare, then you're unclean for respectable people.
Right.
That's so true. And my big thing is I feel like a lot of people on this is going to sound bad. A lot of people on the left that don't work in these services, that don't deal with this world, kind of look at it almost as if there's perfect types of these women. And I think when they talk about, oh, we should get money and this will be easy, just it's like, yeah, you say that now, but all it takes is one person that doesn't fit what you think these people are, and a right-wing person exploits that, i.e., a pregnant woman with a horrible drug addiction that's got multiple children, that maybe has sold one, pimped one, had one abused because they were under the influence, leaves a 5-year-old alone while they go out and prostitute. Any of these things happen, and all of a sudden they get to stuttering, and they don't know how to, or they want to blame it on, some, well, it's because it's like, look, nobody wants to hear the background reasons. It's like everyone has to be viewed as a human being that deserves some sort of care.
And well, and that's the thing, right? The children are perfect for that type of rhetoric, because who deserves care more than a child? Mm-hmm. And who do they deserve care more from than their mother? And you bring out mother who has substance abuse issues, and as a result, their child has suffered horribly, whether due to her neglect or mental illness or violence.
Domestic violence is a huge issue here as well.
Yeah. Exactly. And parents sometimes hit their children. And if you can bring that up, especially in the context of poverty and addiction, then everyone moralizes. Everyone gets on their high horse, and that's why you get to that stuttering. Because the left is too much caught up in this old Yankee vision of this old Yankee understanding of public services, where they are a benefit that goes to worthy people. That sort of you are entitled to your rights because you are good enough to deserve them, rather than just treating it without any complication, without any means testing, without any kind of judgment on character or background or need, simply being like, you're a human being and we don't want you or your children to suffer. So this is the support you get, no questions asked. But if you screw up, right, like a crime is still a crime. And we're not going to take you as emblematic of an entire class of people. This doesn't reflect on the system. This doesn't reflect on the services. This is just one person's sad case.
Right.
And before we get to Kuba, did you have any last words on this, boy?
Oh, me?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the last thing that I'd just like to say is that, we have been, the left is a sector that has been pushing for Medicare for all, and the concept of universal care. Mm-hmm. And I really feel that one of the most vital things that we can do in terms of, dealing with these issues that are severely stigmatized and criminalized, whether it's drug policy or whether it's reproductive rights, to always hold the concept of universal care as one of the utmost important central parts of, no exceptions.
And that is the real deal challenge. And speaking of challenges, Deep State Kuba, you want to talk about the most challenging subject of all, a subject that actually, when I first started doing this show, I had no problem with. And now I feel like every time we bring it up, just all kinds of craziness starts in the chat. So I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to go off air, and I'm going to run in a corner for the next 19 minutes while you talk about this, because I don't want to see what people say. There's gonna be some sort of beef once you start talking about this. I know it. You're gonna get called names. We're all gonna get called crazy names. So
I told you about the guy in DC who was asking my friends about me, right?
yes.
So I mean, maybe I'll have more of that to look forward to as well.
I don't know you know what? I'd rather have the people here than those real taps on the shoulder. Those are the ones I don't want. But okay, I'm gonna say it. Decoy, if you want to run away now so you don't get caught up in this, now's your chance. If you're gonna stay around, you're feeling brave? Okay. Kuba, you want to talk about the lockdown in China.
So, from one public health care system and its pathologies to another, I suppose. But it's okay. They all have insurance. Kidding aside, this is one story. It's actually remarkable given how little attention is being paid by Western media, because within China itself, the continuing lockdowns, especially in Shanghai, but in some other places as well, had really strained relations between regular citizens and the municipal, provincial level Communist Party cadres that enforced the lockdowns. It's been especially bad since, for over a year, China has enjoyed something like normalcy within its own borders, while everybody else has gone through lockdown, masking mandates, social conflicts around lockdowns and masking mandates, vaccine debates, you name it. From the Canadian truckers to protest movements all across the United States, all across Europe. Over COVID mask mandates, I believe, the Reichstag was nearly stormed, which, kind of a big deal. And now this story, in the case of what's happening in China, where the COVID virus is purported to be originated, it's remarkable how little attention is being paid. There was a lengthy period of success with China's zero COVID policy, and other largely East Asian countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, have also had much better responses to COVID through a combination of social mobilization, better use of state resources, and I'd argue a higher level of trust. And that was something that you mentioned before with regards to reproductive health in the United States, that in many of these Asian countries, a zero COVID policy was feasible because you had that combination of well-resourced bureaucracies, a high degree of trust between government and the general population, and a willingness to a political willingness to seek a maximum solution, a willingness to accept even significant levels of dislocation if you could get to a zero COVID posture. And basically, it worked in China, it failed elsewhere, and because of that, COVID has gotten back in. China basically, to a certain extent, can be thought of as a victim of the rest of the world's sloppiness. But when it came back in, it turned out that the background conditions that had enabled that initial success weren't maintained, especially in the city of Shanghai. Shanghai, because of its dependence on international trade, especially the movement of traffic through its port, as well as the movement of people related to financial transactions, business management. The economic costs of the same system of controls, checks, and responses that was effective elsewhere in China was allowed to lapse and was replaced by a laxer system. So when you did have an outbreak occur, the response was delayed, inefficient, and then overcompensated with sudden and abrupt severity. That also gets attached to a media environment which seeks to aggressively control the flow of negative information about the Communist Party, about COVID responses, about problems and inefficiencies with the system. So you have a failure of the system, then censorship seeking to cover up the failure of the system, a failure of the censorship to cover up the failure of the system. And this produces a severe crisis of confidence in the people who are vulnerable to being locked down. And in some places, I believe been locked down for several weeks. And because some municipalities had failed to prepare correctly,
Right.
you have people who are involved in a car accident during delivery of food. One particular story that broke out of the censorship and that mobilized a lot of opposition to the lockdown measures was the case of a delivery driver who was bringing food to people locked down that was involved in a car accident close to a hospital. His wife arrived, but no ambulance came because of the different levels of restriction that were placed on leaving, dealing with people outside of secure environments. And tragically, he didn't make it by the time he was delivered to a hospital, which was a block or two away from the site of the accident. The driver had died. And even if there are less severe failures, for instance, people who are locked in have food delivered to them. They're not permitted to leave their apartments.
Right.
And sometimes the food, it'll be enough calories to keep you alive, but there's no guarantee about what it'll be. So
Right.
you might get a box of bananas. Like, this is your food for the week. And if you want something other than bananas, you're going to have to find somebody to trade with, and you're going to have to find some kind of...
Is it class-based, or is it like the movie Battle Royale, where it's like, look, you may get a pot lid, you may get a gun?
Oh, it's like Battle Royale. It is not class-based, actually.
Right, and I hear that one of the I've heard a lot of issues with the delivery of the food, and how it wasn't very well planned. So especially like perishable things like heat sensitive perishable things like meat, delivery has been a serious issue. Is one of the things that I've heard.
And delivery
culturally, culturally, mm-hmm. One other cultural thing that that I've heard from a couple of people is that shopping daily for food is kind of a normal thing in a lot of Asian countries, that you don't just like buy a bunch of food and have that last for 2 weeks or things, or
Costco, not normal.
Right. So one of the issues that's been I guess a lot of some of the apartments don't really have the capacity to for refrigerated food in large that would last a lot longer.
Exactly. The residential structure of Asian cities much more geared towards smaller living spaces, if you don't have a giant deep freeze and 3 refrigerators, then
Right.
Costco just seems insane, right? Like,
Mhm.
where would you possibly even store that? Especially if you're living by yourself or you have a small family.
Right.
But that would be the ideal if you're forcing people to self-isolate for extended periods of time. And the steps being taken by institutions, and this is another major concern, right? The policy of lockdown may be formulated in Beijing by central party cadres, but the lockdowns themselves are enacted by municipal level or local level or district level, or the management of your apartment building may be the ones who are enforcing the lockdown.
Interesting.
Okay.
So it could. There's. I've heard reports that online of some apartment buildings that require their residents to leave keys outside of their door so that they may be locked in the case of a lockdown. Because the building responds to the local cadres, it has to answer to them for the whereabouts of its residents. So if you want to live here, you have to consent to being locked in if there's a lockdown.
But the state will provide
It's not a prison.
or the apartment complex will provide as far as your sustenance.
The state will provide. But the state may lean on a food distributor, a private company or a state-owned enterprise, to actually do the work. Just like you don't have American government employees doing things like delivering the kits that, or delivering the test kits that Biden promised, or that sort of frontline service delivery. In the case of China, especially under emergency conditions where the directives come straight from the top, the Communist Party has the authority to basically deputize any other institution, public, private, business, personal association, community group, you name it. They can task them with carrying out some part of, say, a lockdown plan. That could be your landlord. That could be your employer. It could be where you get your food.
That's insane. That sounds kind of.
I mean, that's totalitarianism. That's what happens when you have a communist party that can tell everybody what to do.
Right. Well, it almost seems like
works
a
at some things.
Right. Well, it just seems like for that large of a population, it seems like a logistical nightmare to really carry out well. Because I know one other thing that I was reading was about how you still have to be seen by medical providers because of the testing requirements. The medical system there is taking a huge hit because anyone that tests positive, regardless of symptoms, has to be seen and processed.
And also, people testing positive on the medical, in the hospital, or on the medical team, are then immediately pulled out of circulation.
Right.
And this.
Because you can't stay in your apartment for quarantine. You have to go to a quarantine.
You have to. I'm not sure what because there are different rules for travelers and different rules for locals.
Yeah.
I think if I don't know if locals that test positive can quarantine at home, but anybody who's caught sort of out in the open testing positive, I believe that they'll be confined to a facility, like international travelers crossing in. And there's also the case of people who have not been tested, who don't have any symptoms, but because of a neighborhood or municipal lockdown, they get stuck at a second location. right? There's I think there's more than one WeChat celebrity who was on a date and got locked down. And it's like, well, the date's gone. It's week 3 of the date.
I smell a reality show.
Yeah, exactly. Like Netflix, get on that. But there's ways. Sometimes the application, because it goes through secondary institutions, it's not just government agencies, but some universities will make one decision for their students. And often it's a competition on who's going to be harsher in implementing a lockdown over the people they're responsible for. So you can have one set of policies that apply to students because they're made by one office, and another that applies to faculty where students get locked in and faculty can come and go as they please. And if there was success within reach, I think that these policies would be less controversial. But the fact that this latest outbreak has cascaded and continued has undermined the confidence in the capability of the Communist Party to manage large social problems. It's one thing if they're brutal but get the job done. But if they're brutal and you still have COVID, then that creates a real grievance in the population.
Right.
Jesus. Well, we are approaching the end of the hour. I want to thank Ikoi Hiro. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
I mean, she's the real hero. Yeah, I deserve that. Yeah. No, I'll see myself out.
Kuba, it's always a pleasure to have you back on the news show and being my co-anchor.
I'll be your Ed McMahon, right? Any day. I'm flattered that you'd ask.
Oh, you are my Ed McMahon. We actually, on the show I was on earlier today, we were talking about Slavs came up in the conversation about these Nazi black metal bands that are Aryan because they hate Slavs. It's not all white people that hate Slavs. That's important when we talk about things like white supremacy.
Yeah,
people understand.
Yeah, no.
Slav hate.
If this were World War II times, I would be the first one in the camp. Funny, right?
And when I went to the UK, they were like, "We don't have Latin people here, but we definitely have Eastern Europeans," and they meant you.
Yes. They come over here. They like swim the English Channel. They steal all our cancer research and geopolitics jobs. Okay. Like they can't get the smell of sausage and potatoes out of the apartment. But then again, that was true of the Irish as well. So what are you complaining about?
Well, we will be going to the Champagne Room where we'll be doing the call-in show. So if you are a patron, get ready. I'll have the number on the screen right away. Kuba, are you ready to take some calls?
I'm ready to. Yes. I will take them like a reservation.
There is a movie that I recently watched this review on that I'd never heard of before called Miami Connection. Have you ever heard of it?
No. Is it any good?
No, it's really horrible. It's from the 80s. And it involves...
I mean, Jason recommended it, so...
Oh, it's going to be ridiculous. It's me.
Best kind of horrible.
Pascal is the one that says, let's have a movie night and let's watch this interesting movie we can have a deep conversation about. I'm like, dude, let's watch a movie night and we can watch a movie we can have popcorn to and like dig around and laugh at all night. So we're different. We're yin and yang. But this movie,
Popcorn movies are good.
okay, well,
There
you
is
might
a
like
place
this.
and time for them.
You might like this, and I want to play a little bit in the champagne room when we go to the champagne room. It involves a taekwondo rock band and cocaine dealing ninjas.
Everybody knows
was
that
this? When was this made?
In the
clearly pre-fentanyl, right? Because everyone
Yeah.
knows that ninjas nowadays.
It's I think it came out in like 88. It is the most amazing nonsensical film I've ever seen. So once again, taekwondo rock band, cocaine dealing ninjas, and there's just karate all over the place. So I want to watch a little bit of that with you guys before we get into our deep conversations.
Sounds good.
So we will see you guys in the champagne room, and we are